My parents backed my sister fully, neglecting my true dreams. Now, after years proving my worth, I'm who they call to fix the huge mess she made. They bet everything on my sister, poured every resource into her path, while my own dreams were swept under the rug. And now, after years of proving myself in the shadows, guess who they're calling to clean up the absolute wreckage she made? My name is Ethan, and this isn't just about business. It's about a lifetime of being invisible. I was just 15 when the truth finally hit me. My family had already chosen their star. I'm 29 now, and looking back, the signs were always there. When I was younger, if you'd asked me about my family, I'd probably have said typical. But it was anything but. Every small achievement my sister, Chloe, had a little trophy, a certificate. It triggered a lavish dinner party. Meanwhile, my parents would drop everything to see her dance recital, while I sat alone on the sidelines at my soccer games, desperately hoping they were just stuck in traffic. They weren't. They just didn't show up. Chloe, she's 3 years younger than me, and let's be honest, she was gifted. The kind of kid who absolutely shone on stage, who could walk into any room and effortlessly command every single eye. She had this charm, this elegance, and an uncanny ability to cry on cue, which, surprise, surprise, worked wonders when she needed to escape trouble or, even better, shift the blame onto me. My parents, Rachel and John, they weren't just proud of her, they were enamored. It was like she wasn't just their daughter, but their most valuable, carefully curated investment. Honestly, for a long time I didn't even mind. I wasn't the type to compete for the spotlight. I loved getting lost in electronics, tinkering in the garage, figuring out how things ticked. While Chloe was nailing her pirouettes and earning standing ovations at every school play, I was in my own world, bringing old laptops back to life, earning a bit of cash fixing phones for the neighbors. I was genuinely proud of those little projects. But my parents, they never looked up from Chloe long enough to even notice. And when they did, it was usually just a dismissive, "Oh, that's nice, Ethan. Just don't spend too much time on that stuff. You don't want to burn out before college." College. That became the defining moment. For Chloe, it was an all-out assault. Elite summer camps, private tutors, college prep courses starting freshman year. For me, I was told to be practical and explore trade school. Look, there's absolutely nothing wrong with trade school, but that wasn't my dream. I wanted to study engineering, to eventually build my own tech company. But every time I brought it up, I got the same tight-lipped smile, the same condescending lecture about how not everyone is cut out for big dreams. Man, it stung. But I just pushed through. I thought, if I just prove myself, they'll have to see me. So I kept working, fixing problems, learning to code, teaching myself software design from ancient manuals and YouTube tutorials. By 18, I developed my first app. It was clunky, visually terrible, barely functional, but it was mine. I remember showing it to my parents, desperately hoping for something. Interest, curiosity, maybe even a flicker of pride. Instead, my mom glanced at her phone mid-sentence and said, "You know, Chloe's team might qualify for nationals this year. Isn't that exciting?" That was it. That was the first time I didn't even bother to respond. I just nodded and walked out of the room. The older we got, the worse it became. My mother practically micromanaged Chloe's Ivy League applications. A full team of private consultants, vision boards, the works. I, on the other hand, was attending night classes at a small college, running a thriving repair business out of my basement. I was actually making more money than I expected, enough to buy my own beat-up car and start saving. But my parents, they still treated it like a hobby, as if I was just spinning my wheels until I found something worthwhile to do. But the moment that truly shattered me, that was when Chloe got into Columbia. I congratulated her honestly. I genuinely meant it. And of course, the entire family threw this enormous dinner party. Friends, extended family, catered food, champagne flowing for the adults. And sometime between the endless speeches and the clinking toasts, my father stood up, tapped his glass. He said, We always knew Chloe would do something special. She's the kind of person who can lead a company someday, maybe even take over the family business. I froze. The family business. My dad built this modest but profitable logistics firm from the ground up in his 20s. He'd tell me stories, working nights, hustling for contracts, even sleeping in his van sometimes. I always pictured him passing it down to me one day. We talked about it when I was a kid. I figured I'd earn it. That night, I stared at him, desperately searching for any sign, any indication that he hadn't just completely erased me from our family's future plans. But he didn't even glance my way. He just raised his glass to Chloe, who was beaming like a Broadway star. I didn't say a word that night. I didn't make a scene. But something inside me just broke. Not dramatically, not like a grand, explosive collapse, but more like a quiet, fundamental shift. It was like finally accepting a truth I'd spent years deliberately ignoring. Their decision had been made. I was just background noise in Chloe's blinding spotlight. Over the next few years, that truth became crystal clear. My parents paid for Chloe's tuition, her off-campus housing, even helped her launch a little fashion firm on the side. Me, I once asked for a small loan to upgrade some servers for a client project. They said they were short on funds right now. I didn't ask again. Instead, I took on more work, skipped sleep, pushed harder. I learned more about business, forged connections with other developers, pursued online certifications in design and AI systems. My side hustle grew into something much more substantial. I still showed up for family dinners, still played the part, but I no longer expected anything from them. They didn't even notice the change. Not really. As long as I smiled and said, "Congrats, Chloe," on cue. My mouth stayed shut. I remained invisible. But then came the pivot, the twist that set everything in motion. 3 years ago, my father called a family meeting. I remember it vividly because it was the first time he'd ever expressed an interest in discussing the business with me. My heart actually raced a little. I wondered if he'd finally seen me. But no. He announced he was retiring early and wanted to lead the company into a new era. That's how he put it. He said he'd given careful thought to who should succeed him. And after much deliberation, he decided it was time to appoint Chloe as CEO. She'd learned leadership at school. She had new branding ideas, and she possessed natural charm, which he believed were more important than logistics or operations. I asked calmly what would happen to the existing management team, the systems, the employees who'd been with the firm for decades. He just shrugged. They'll adapt. It's time for new blood. And me? I asked. He grinned, as if he'd just pied me. "Ethan, you're doing great in your own way, but this isn't your thing." That sentence lodged itself in me like a thorn under the skin. Chloe took charge, and exactly as I expected, everything began to unravel. Slowly at first. A few lost clients. Some key employees left. She brought in her college buddies to modernize operations, fired old hands who'd built the company from the ground up because they didn't fit the new culture. She relaunched with a sparkling new logo and a bizarre mission statement that sounded like it was written by an AI trying to be funny. The numbers plummeted. Vendors were furious. But my parents? They kept defending her. She's just finding her footing. She just needs time. I remained silent, focusing on my own work. My company had by then grown into a full-fledged technology consultancy, with 5 staff and clients in 3 countries. But I didn't boast. I didn't gloat. I just watched. I watched as Chloe drove the company into the ground, while my parents maintained their blind faith in her, despite every glaring flaw. Then, a few months ago, my mother called. Her voice was thin, shaky, utterly exhausted. "Ethan," she whispered, "we need to talk. It's about the business." I leaned back in my chair, glancing at the charts on my second monitor. Just cleared a 7-figure contract, But I didn't tell her that. "Okay," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "What's going on?" There was a heavy, pregnant pause. It's bad, Ethan. Chloe, she made some mistakes. Big ones. The company's in serious trouble. We're barely keeping the lights on. We were wondering if you could maybe stop by and just take a look. That was the moment. The exact moment everything pivoted. I didn't say anything at first. Just let the silence stretch, because a part of me, a deep, ingrained part, still wanted to help. Despite everything, they were my family. But then another part, an older, much sharper part, it roared to life. It remembered every single time they'd chosen her. Every time I was told to stay in my lane. All those evenings I'd forced a smile while they celebrated her accomplishments, as if I didn't even exist. And now they were calling me, begging. That's when I understood. They hadn't just underestimated me. They'd forgotten I even existed. And now they were suddenly remembering me at the absolute worst possible moment. But I wasn't the Ethan they'd so easily cast aside. And I sure as hell wasn't going to quietly save them. I didn't rush over to their house. Not because I was trying to be theatrical, but because I needed to believe that they needed me. After years as an afterthought, a shadow in Chloe's spotlight, it felt surreal that they'd reached out first. The next day, my mother texted again. Ethan, I know you're busy, but this is serious. Dad is really worried. We could truly benefit from your insight. I almost chuckled at that. Insight. As if I hadn't been quietly building my own successful empire while they poured every resource into my sister's vanity projects. Still, I agreed to come by later that week. I didn't wear a suit, just jeans and a sweatshirt. I wanted to remind them that I was still me. The version they'd agreed was not successful. My mother answered the door, looking 5 years older than I remembered. Her hair was in a messy bun, and her eyes looked like she hadn't slept in days. Ethan, she murmured, pulling me into a hug. It's really bad. The living room looked exactly the same, but the vibe was all wrong. My father sat rigid on the couch, staring at a folder that looked filled with death certificates. And Chloe? She wasn't even there. Apparently, she was meeting with a branding coach that afternoon, which my mother said was critical. She's still trying to be hopeful, my mother said, wringing her hands. But we've lost 3 major clients in the last 3 months. Payroll bounced last week. And, well, the bank froze our credit lines. I kept my expression neutral. Inside, I felt a confusing mix of sympathy, vindication, and a tiny sliver of shame. But mostly I felt disconnected, like I was watching a documentary about people I once knew. They laid it all out for me. Chloe had taken over 2 years ago. At first, she was all enthusiasm and big ideas. Rebranding the entire firm, switching to some fashionable new logistics software that absolutely no one in the warehouse understood. She fired the operations manager, a guy who'd been with my dad since day one, because he didn't fit the new culture. She'd hired her college roommate to handle vendor contracts, which, unsurprisingly, spiraled into a massive legal disaster. And the money she was blowing on ineffective influencers just to boost the company's image? It was sickening. I flipped through the reports. Red, more red. And you allowed this to happen? I asked, bluntly, looking from one parent to the other. My father wouldn't meet my gaze. We felt she needed more time, Ethan, he mumbled. She's under a lot of pressure. You know how hard it is for women in business. That almost made me choke. I've worked with some incredible women, truly driven, talented, creative powerhouses. Chloe didn't lack opportunity. She lacked accountability. They asked if I could check the back-end systems and maybe recommend someone to help, but I knew exactly what they were really asking. They just weren't brave enough to say the words out loud yet. After 3 hours, I told them I'd think about it, and that I'd need access to various files and admin dashboards to do a proper review. They agreed immediately. My father even said something like, "We should have brought you in earlier." That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever received. When I finally saw Chloe the next week, she barely even recognized me. "Oh, hey Ethan," she chirped, flipping her sunglasses onto her head. You're here to do stuff, right? I just waited. She grinned a little too wide. Don't worry, I won't get in your way. I know this is more your speed. More my speed. She still saw me as that garage nerd playing with wires while she dominated the world. Except the world she'd built was on fire, and she hadn't even smelled the smoke. Over the next 2 weeks, I dove in, and what I found was worse than I anticipated. Chloe had misclassified employees as contractors, leading to a mountain of overdue taxes. She'd failed to fulfill several service contracts. A $55,000 marketing effort resulted in zero ROI because the influencer she hired was shadow banned for deceiving followers. The CRM was a disaster. Orders were falling through the cracks. Yet, she was still pulling a 6-figure salary and expensing costly handbags as client presents. I put together a 20-page report. It covered immediate risks, midterm recovery options, long-term strategic pivots. Every single thing was color-coded. My team, I had a team. We even developed automation tech that could streamline their processes and slash expenses by 40% in 3 months. I texted it to my dad and suggested we meet in person. When I got there on Saturday, Chloe was already present. I read your little report, she announced, before I even sat down. Cute. Very spreadsheety. Why? My mother flinched. Chloe, please, she pleaded. No, I mean it. Chloe insisted, arms folded. It all seems so rational, so binary, Ethan. But business is more than just numbers. It's about vision, relationships, narrative. Chloe, I said, my voice dangerously calm. Your narrative cost this company $350,000 last quarter. She rolled her eyes. You're just bitter. You always have been. This isn't about saving the company. This is about you trying to prove something. I looked at my parents, waiting for them to intervene. They didn't. So I stood up. You're right, I said. This isn't about proving anything. Because I already did. I built something entirely on my own. I don't need your validation anymore. I looked directly at my parents. But if you want this company to survive, Chloe cannot be in control. Not even on paper. I will help, but only if I have complete control. Operational, financial, legal. Chloe gasped like I just slapped her. You're not serious. You want them to just hand it over to you. No, I said. I want them to keep it. You ran it into the ground. I'm offering to fix it. For a long moment, nobody said anything. Then my mother finally stood. Maybe we should discuss this rationally, she ventured. No, I countered. This isn't a conversation. This is a decision. My father looked utterly torn. His pride in Chloe was still painfully evident on his face. But so was the sheer exhaustion, the raw anxiety. And then Chloe said something that completely severed the last thread of kindness I had for her. If you do this, she sneered, pointing at me like a petulant child, I'll tell everyone you sabotaged me, that you inserted incorrect data. I'll go online, Ethan, I have followers. You don't have the right to eliminate me just because you're envious. The room went dead silent. My mother looked terrified, and in that moment it clicked. They didn't know everything, but they absolutely knew she was unstable. They knew she was reckless, yet they let her do it because they were terrified of shattering their golden girl's perfect image, even as their entire home, their legacy, crumbled around them. I'm done, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. If you want my help, I need it in writing. Full authority. My lawyer will send over a draft. You have 60 hours. Chloe laughed then, but it wasn't a real sound. It was just air and a deep, empty despair. You think you're better than me? She whispered. No, I said, walking towards the door. I know I am. Just as I was about to step out, my mother cried out, Ethan, please don't leave us. I hesitated, but I didn't turn back, because despite everything, they still hadn't said what needed to be said, and I wasn't going to come back until they did. I didn't cry when I left that house. I didn't scream, didn't throw things, didn't call my best friend or drown myself in liquor like some dramatic movie character. No, I drove home in silence, windows down, the cold breeze chilling my cheeks. When I got back to my minimalist apartment, which honestly had more servers than furniture, I just sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall. It was a strange feeling. Not quite rage, not quite despair. Just emptiness. I think, deep down, I'd always held out a sliver of hope that eventually everything would balance out. That my parents would truly see me. Not just glance or remember to send a birthday text, but truly recognize me as someone capable, someone worthwhile. But what Chloe said that day and how swiftly she was allowed to say it, it shattered that illusion completely. They weren't going to pick me. They never had. And it was time for me to stop waiting around like a backup quarterback, hoping to finally get called off the bench. For the first week after that blowout, I didn't do anything. My consulting staff, bless them, picked up the slack. I'd automated so much of the admin side, and our customer base was solid. We were okay. I was fine outwardly, but inwardly I felt shattered. Not destroyed, but stripped down to something raw, something vulnerable. On day 8, I dug out an old high school journal. The cover was worn, bowed at the edges. Inside were doodles, my very first concepts for an app I'd always dreamed of building. It was a simple idea, really, just a program to help small businesses track inventory across multiple platforms. Back then, I didn't have the skills to make it real. But now I did. And that was when everything clicked. If I was going to succeed, it had to be on my terms. No more waiting for their permission. No more trying to prove myself to people who only knew how to ignore me. I stayed up all night until 4 a.m., mapping out version 2.0. No distractions, no second-guessing. Just pure, concentrated effort. It felt good. It felt familiar, like finally coming home to a version of myself I hadn't seen in years. That same week, I reached out to a mentor, Nina, a former Google employee who invests in underrepresented founders. I told her I wanted to pivot, to build something scalable, not just fix other people's broken systems, but to create my own. She listened, asked sharp questions, took notes, and then she said something that stayed with me ever since. They underestimated you. It's their loss. Don't make it yours too. So I got back to work. My consulting team thought I was crazy at first. Shifting our focus meant sacrificing some stable earnings. But I had enough saved to keep us afloat for at least 8 months. I decided I'd rather bet on myself than keep cleaning up other people's messes indefinitely. We started small. Just me, an engineer named Adam, and a UX designer named Sarah. We met daily at my apartment. No fancy whiteboards, no ping pong tables, just laptops, coffee, and frenzied brainstorming. The concept was deceptively simple. An intuitive AI-powered logistics platform for small to medium-sized businesses. One that could identify trends, offer proactive solutions, and slash overhead by half, all without needing specialized IT staff. I named it Glassline because it was designed to reveal what was previously unseen. Every shipment, every delay, every expenditure. And somehow, that name felt intensely personal. 8 months later, the first version launched. It wasn't perfect, but it was clean, fast, and most importantly, functional. We snagged beta users through LinkedIn, and word of mouth spread like wildfire. By the end of year 1, over 350 companies were using it. I didn't take a paycheck the entire time. I lived modestly, no trips, no shopping sprees, no fancy cars. Just me, building something real. While everyone else still dismissed me as that basement IT guy who just didn't see the big picture. Every now and then, I'd get updates through the grapevine. My parents never called personally, but relatives would chat. The family firm was losing customers. Chloe, apparently, had doubled down on another influencer campaign that totally flopped. She'd also started blaming the revenue drop on toxic criticism from former employees. Classic Chloe. I never commented, never interacted. I just listened, nodded, and went back to work. But then something truly interesting happened. 18 months after launching, Glassline was featured in a mid-tier business publication as one of the top 10 companies revolutionizing logistics. A few weeks after that, we got our first purchase offer from a competitor I'd actually respected for years. I declined, not because I didn't want the money, but because it wasn't time. I hadn't built something just to cash out. I wanted it to grow, to last, to be what people remember me for. Not the kid patching phones in the garage. Not the guy passed over for a failed CEO, but Ethan Shaw, the inventor of Glassline. A month later, my mother texted me, "Ethan, may we please talk?" I stared at it for a long time. The next morning, my father called. I didn't pick up, but then it happened. An official email from the family company's domain. It was a formal request to consult on a last-ditch restructuring strategy. They were finally saying the word I'd been waiting years to hear. Assistance. Not because they suddenly wanted to be nice, or because they finally saw me, but because they were drowning. The firm was on the brink. Vendors were walking away. A former warehouse manager had filed a complaint for unfair termination. Chloe apparently had abandoned ship for a spiritual retreat and wasn't even returning emails. And their accountant, a guy named James who always smelled like cough drops, he just vanished mid-quarter without leaving a single note. They didn't just want my help. They wanted me to save them. For a brief moment, I considered saying yes. Because they, my parents, hadn't earned my help. But the firm had. There were still good people there. People I remembered from office picnics and holiday parties. People who'd offered me snacks, ruffled my hair, and said, "You're going to be just like your dad someday." But then I read the email's final sentence. "We hope you will consider this. Chloe did her best. Please understand, it wasn't her fault." That was the final straw. Even now, even in utter desperation, they still couldn't face the truth. They couldn't call it what it was. So I didn't respond. Instead, I forwarded the email to Nina, asking her to schedule a meeting with our legal counsel. If they were serious about a transfer, it wasn't going to be some casual favor. I was done doing things out of guilt or some misguided hope. They had never imagined I could build something like Glassline. And now that it stood taller than the crumbling empire they'd handed to Chloe, they wanted back in. But I wasn't that child waiting in the wings anymore. I was the one holding the curtain open, and they were about to discover just how dramatically that stage had changed. It was shocking how calm I felt typing that email. No bitterness, no adrenaline surge, just a peaceful, absolute clarity. Nina sat across from me in the bright, modern co-working space we'd upgraded to after our first big investment round. The kind of place I used to fantasize about while coding from a rickety desk in my bedroom, surrounded by takeaway boxes. Now, it was real. It was mine. "I'm not doing this out of spite," I told her as I pressed send. "I understand," she replied, her gaze firm. "But you're not doing it out of guilt, either. That's crucial." She was right. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to my family. I was responding to reality with precision, with leverage, with power. The letter I sent wasn't confrontational. It was professional. It was addressed to both my parents, outlining Glassline Technologies Incorporated's proposed takeover of their firm. This wasn't a consultation offer. It wasn't a proposition for collaborative leadership. It was a buyout offer, and it came with ironclad conditions. Complete operational control, full ownership transferred within 30 days, all decision-making authority moved to me and my executive board. And Chloe? Permanently removed from all leadership and stakeholder positions. It wasn't about punishment. It was about shielding the company from any more harm and preventing my own name from being associated with their mess, unless I had total, absolute control. But later that night, the response did arrive. Not from my parents. It was from Chloe. The subject line screamed, "This is war." The email itself was a furious, rambling diatribe. Pages of blame, denial, and twisted logic. She accused me of manipulating our parents, of exploiting a sensitive moment. Said I was trying to obliterate her legacy and take something that was never mine to begin with. But my favorite line, the one that really got me, was this: "You were never meant to lead, Ethan. You just waited in the shadows long enough for something to fall into your lap." I stared at that sentence for a long, long time, because for a split second, a tiny, insidious part of me believed it. Not because it was true, but because I'd been force-fed that script for so long. The same old lines, over and over. You're not a leader. You're not exceptional. You're not Chloe. But then I remembered. I remembered staying up late coding while Chloe partied. I remembered spending years building something real while she curated Instagram posts for fake businesses. I remembered every single invoice I'd chased, every bug I'd fixed, every investor who'd turned me down until eventually they said yes. Nothing had fallen into my lap. I didn't respond to her email. I was building it one block at a time. I simply forwarded it to my lawyer and told him to file it under hostile communications. If she wanted war, I would respond with silence and strategic planning. The following several days were a whirlwind of planning. My legal team set to work on drafting a formal letter of intent. Nina and I met with our CFO and financial advisors to calculate the maximum amount for a strategic takeover. I didn't want the company because I missed my family. I wanted it because, if properly recovered, it was valuable. The logistical infrastructure remained robust. The branding was a disaster. The client relationships had been burned. But the business's bones remained intact. It could be rebuilt with the right leadership. I began gently reaching out to ex-staff members that Chloe had let go because they didn't fit her style. They were first suspicious and unwilling to speak. But as I explained what I was doing, their reactions changed. One by one, they offered to return, with conditions, of course, but the trust was still there. They remembered me, not as the kid who used to hang out at the office on half days, but as the man who never spoke down to them, who asked questions, and who was genuinely interested in how things worked. I also asked my CTO, Adam, to investigate the family company's failing back-end systems. He put together a demo that demonstrated how our Glassline technology could replace their old infrastructure and save hundreds of thousands of dollars within a year. It wasn't just about taking control. It was about evolution. Nina, meanwhile, was connecting with some anonymous investors eager to expand our reach. They didn't care about family drama. They cared about ROI. If I could pull off this transaction, it would open up a whole new market niche for Glassline. Everything was falling into place. But then came the curveball. My parents demanded a meeting. Not by email. Not through lawyers. In person, at my office. Not their crumbling headquarters. At first, every instinct screamed trap. An emotional plea. A guilt trip designed to make me crumble. But Nina convinced me to accept. You don't have to agree to anything, she advised. But power isn't just about winning. It's about showing up on your own terms. So I said yes. They arrived late. My mother looked even more fatigued than I remembered. Her blouse was crumpled. There was a faint stain on the sleeve. My father, he looked smaller. Not physically, but emotionally, as if the weight of years had finally crushed him. They sat across from me in our sleek, glass-walled conference room. Sunlight cutting crisp lines across the table. You've come a long way, Ethan, my father remarked, scanning the space. I have, I replied simply. Why are we here? My mother spoke first. We've reviewed the offer, and we're just not ready to sign everything. I waited, said nothing. We're happy to give you some control, she continued. We think an 8-month transition with shared leadership is reasonable. I slowly nodded. Then I stood up. The meeting is concluded. What? My father asked, startled. You don't have 8 months, I explained, my voice flat. You have 6 weeks. Your accounts are redlined. Your employees are walking out the door. And Chloe is one influencer away from dragging your business into another massive PR crisis. And you think this is leverage." My mother's voice trembled. "Ethan, please. It's still our firm." "No," I said. It was, "Now the ship is sinking, and I'm offering you a lifeboat. If you don't want it, that's fine. Just don't pretend you're still in charge." Silence hung heavy, and then my dad said something I truly didn't expect. She said she would sue us. I blinked. "What?" he murmured, still not looking at me. "Chloe, she threatened to sue us for emotional damages if we turn the firm over to you. Claimed we cut her out unfairly and ruined her future." I actually laughed. A real, honest-to-God laugh. "That's rich," I said. "She wrecked herself. I merely volunteered to clean up." They didn't respond. I softened a fraction. "I'm not here to hurt her," I explained. "I'm here to salvage what's left. But I won't do it blindly. I refuse to do it with one hand tied behind my back." They glanced at each other. My mother wiped away tears. Then my father added, almost inaudibly, "We'll talk to the lawyers." That night, I stayed late in the office. I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Too much was still at stake. But something inside me had fundamentally shifted. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just vying for a place at the table. I was building the damn table myself, deciding who sat at it, what we'd eat, and what the rules were. I had the leverage now, and I fully intended to use it to rebuild in my image, not to destroy. 15 days after that meeting, my parents signed the paperwork. It was a Wednesday morning in a lawyer's office overlooking the city skyline. The room was silent, save for the rustle of papers and the faint click of a pen. My mother wouldn't meet my gaze. My father's hand trembled slightly as he signed the final page. Chloe wasn't there. She refused to come, sending a furious email the night before that ended with, "You'll regret this. You'll all regret this." But I didn't regret a single thing. Once the sale was complete, Glassline Technologies formally acquired the family firm. We rebranded it, reorganized it, and began the full-scale transformation. We named it ShawLink, not for ego but for insight. The old corporation was bloated, polluted, and utterly broken. ShawLink was clean, precise, scalable, and finally it was mine. The very first thing I did was walk through the old building. It was eerie. Dusty corners, empty workstations, broken vending machines. Half the warehouse lights didn't even work. My father used to say this company was his proudest achievement, but under Chloe's reign, it had become a hollow shell. So we gutted it. Not completely, but just enough to breathe life back into it. We brought in my Glassline team. They overhauled the logistics systems, automating 50% of the manual operations, introducing real-time shipment tracking with predictive delays. It took weeks of late nights, working through weekends, but the energy was electric. Everyone felt it. Something monumental was happening. And those 5 people Chloe had so carelessly fired, I personally rehired them. David, the operations manager, almost burst into tears when I walked into the coffee shop where he was working and asked if he wanted his old job back. He didn't even ask about the pay. He just shook my hand and said, "I've been waiting for this day for years." The staff meetings felt different now. No more jargon or buzzword-heavy presentations. We talked data. We talked results. We talked strategy. And people listened. Not because I demanded it, but because I had earned it. Then came the real payday. 3 months after the acquisition, we secured a contract with a national medical supplier. They needed ultra-efficient, discrete distribution across 12 states with zero tolerance for delays. That kind of request would have crumbled the old company. ShawLink performed flawlessly. Revenue quadrupled, fast. Chloe, meanwhile, she imploded. After the sale, she tried to rally online support, posting a long, heavily filtered video titled "The Truth About My Brother's Takeover." In it, she painted herself as a visionary brought down by corporate greed and patriarchal control. For about a week, her followers, mostly lifestyle influencers and aspiring entrepreneurs, sympathized. Then the leaks started. Emails, bills, internal memos. disgruntled employee testimonials. It turns out pretending to be a CEO while running a fashion blog doesn't sit well with actual business people. By the end of the month, her credibility was shattered. She lost sponsorships. Her branding coach dropped her. Even her beloved healing retreat in Sedona canceled her speaking engagement. She sent me one final message. Congratulations. I hope it was worth wrecking your sister's career for a silly warehouse. I didn't respond because it wasn't about her career. It was about everyone else she'd walked all over, trying to build it. My parents remained silent after the transaction. Mostly, I heard from mutual acquaintances that my mother was too ashamed to go to her book club, and my father simply stopped talking about the company altogether. They hadn't just lost the firm, they'd lost the illusion. For years, they believed they were building a dynasty through Chloe, but all they were really doing was propping up a house of cards. 6 months after the transaction, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. His voice, when I listened, was low, worn out. Ethan, he said, I just wanted to let you know, I saw the piece in Forbes. You're doing something truly fantastic. I'm sorry I didn't trust in you sooner. That voicemail, it should have hit me hard, but it didn't, because I didn't need it anymore. I had already won, not just the company or the profits. I'd redeemed myself, the version of myself I used to hide for their comfort, the kid who fixed old phones and drew app designs in composition notebooks, the teenager who swallowed his pride every time they told him to be realistic, the man they pretended was doing well in his own small way. He wasn't small anymore. He was responsible for hundreds of jobs, for families' livelihoods, for suppliers being paid on time. And they knew it. Everyone knew it. We hosted a grand relaunch ceremony in our new offices, a modern building on the outskirts of the city. Sleek, energy efficient, filled with technology that made the old warehouse look like an ancient ruin. Clients flew in from across the country. We hosted a grand relaunch ceremony in our new offices, a modern building on the outskirts of the city. Sleek, energy efficient, filled with technology that made the old warehouse look like an ancient ruin. Clients flew in from across the country. We announced new partnerships, showcased future growth plans, and celebrated Shawlink's next chapter. At the end of the night, I stood on the main stage. No script, no PowerPoint, just a microphone and a packed room. I want to thank everyone who believed in this work before the rest of the world, I said. We built this together. Those of us who stayed faithful, who got back up after every setback, who created something out of nothing. The applause was deafening. I stepped off stage and walked outside into the cool evening air. Stars glittered overhead, silent and beautiful. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying anything. No resentment, no need for retribution, just peace. And I think truly that was the real victory, because in the end, they didn't just underestimate me. They handed me the keys to prove them wrong. And I did it, quietly, tirelessly, without their permission, and entirely on my own terms. It was the last time I was ever called the shadow